So I did warn you that it was,
Yeah.
it's a little intense.
That was rough. Kudos to that actress, but we'll get there when we get there.
Yeah. Just heads up for the folks at home. This one comes with a content warning for all of the things.
Pretty much, yeah.
Specifically, discussion of essay and
depiction of it,
reproductive abuse, and yeah. So we're going to be talking about this. We're going to be talking about traumatic stuff. So yeah, and also child abuse. Yeah. Content warning for all the things.
Pretty much.
We're hitting the trauma hard today on the Muppet Sex and Drama. Hi, friends.
Howdy, y'all.
How's it going?
And welcome to Muppet Sex and Trauma. I'm Sara Ezzat. I make the Pop Culture Critic videos on YouTube.
I'm Josh Gosdin, and I'm a big old nerd.
And with us today is Oddnon.
I'm Oddnon, Twitch streamer, comic author, writer, etc.
Extraordinaire.
Glad to be back.
Yeah, glad to have you back.
Thank you.
I remembered from last time that you liked the body horror stuff. So I figured, well...
So you saved one up for him, huh?
This would be the right one to have you back for.
No kidding.
Oh, Lord. And a hell of a one it was.
Incubator was written by Richard Manning and directed by Ian Watson. Scorpi's wormhole experiments aren't going well. Whatever they do, his test pilots are turning to goo. It seems some part of the wormhole data he took from Crichton's brain is still coded. Scorpius decides to try and get John's help decoding it. Well, not John exactly, but a neural clone of John left on the chip, which Scorpi inserts in his own brain. And now there are 3 Johns in the world. The John on Moya is testing his shipmate's patience. He's not sleeping, just flying Moya in circles, certain that he can sense a wormhole somewhere. Dargo tries to reason with him. The girls are already fed up, and they really need to do something else. Anything but keep flying around aimlessly. John negotiates for just a little more time searching. Meanwhile, one of Scorpi's scientists, Linfer, tests a new kind of shielding she thinks might prevent the wormhole goo effect.
In Scorpi's mind palace, clone John thinks he's in hell. Or maybe he would just prefer that to Scorpia's trauma-dumping exposition-a-thon. Scorpi believes if he can convince clone John of the danger posed by the Scarans, he will decode the data of his own free will.
And so we see an autobiography of young Scorpius.
Raised by Taza, the nanny from hell, who wanted him to hate all things Sebation, including the Sebation part of himself, that left him permanently tortured by heat delirium. Instead, little Scorp nurtured a hatred of her and all things Scaran. Eventually he escaped and found his way to the Peacekeepers, with whom he traded all his Scaran knowledge for information about his parentage.
On Moya, the crew gets an unexpected visitor. It's Linfer, who has survived a trip through a wormhole and come to defect. She offers her knowledge of wormholes in exchange for Moya. Ordinarily, this would be ridiculous. But Linfer comes from a species that Pilot and Moya trust, and they would be into it. Crichton is tempted by the offer, which annoys the rest of the crew.
Past Scorpi learns that his mother was a Sebation colonist, kidnapped and forced into a Scaran breeding program. He visits the site of her kidnapping only to be captured himself by Taza, who wants to traumatize him just a little bit more. He's able to free himself, kill her, and then complete his defection to the Peacekeepers.
On Moya, the crew are still arguing, but it no longer matters. It seems Linfer's shielding only delayed the wormhole-induced gooification. Jewel and Pilot help her leave the ship in her prowler, which she then explodes. At Scorpius' base, the nurse is worried that Scorpi's trip down memory lane is overheating him. She wants to pull the plug, but Braca insists it continues.
In Scorpi's mind palace, Clone John isn't impressed. He has no love of the Scarans, but that changes nothing about the Peacekeepers. As they argue, the heat gets worse, and then Clone John disperses himself as Scorpi awakes overheating.
Braca burns himself, saving Scorpius, but the chip is fried. Scorpi recites what he can from memory before giving Braca a well-earned attaboy. And on Moya, Dargo and John contemplate their cabin fever and worry about what Scorpius might be up to. So, initial thoughts?
Oddnon.
I'm still just kind of like thinking about it, so it's going to kind of come out as we're talking. But one of the things that's always I don't remember what sci-fi movie it was. It was like a sci-fi horror movie from like the early to mid 90s that had a very similar, it was very different, but it had a similar plot of like someone in your head that you can't get rid of. So uh that's when I learned that I had a fear of that. Um and so this really kind of turned that up to 11.
Yes, it
In
would.
the sense that not only is it just another person existing in your head, so to speak, but somebody who hates you,
Mhm.
or is trying to get something from you and has the ability or has access to the strings to do it. It's deeply unsettling. Um, and it really, like, I'm even struggling to like come up with the right words, but even though it's sort of all's well that ends well, as well as it can anyway. Um, I don't know. Between the clone episode and then now this one, like there's three of them now. Ugh,
It's a lot, isn't it?
it is.
Yeah. No, I loved this episode front to back. I had a blast with it. The drama was top notch. I really loved the locked in a room with a serial killer approach to the mind intruder trope that they took with Scorpi and clone Brain John. And I also, for once, didn't find the drama amongst the crew of Moya um, unbelievable. Like it was very grounded this episode. For me, the bar is always do we or do we not dismember our friend to get what we want, which they decided to go ahead and do that in season one. But in this episode, there was a very believable like discussion about Linfer's offer. Um, and so I really found the drama on Moya compelling too. And Sara knows I've been griping for a few episodes of like, gee, it sure is good that Wayne Pegram got promoted to the opening credits just to not show up for 9 episodes. And now all of a sudden he's firing on all cylinders and we're getting Scorpius left and right. And we get like a juicy, juicy bite of Scorpius this episode. I loved it.
Yeah, this is a troubling one, but a fascinating one because I think like Scorpius is such an interesting villain because
Yes.
he absolutely does not see himself as a villain, and he doesn't wish John ill. He's just completely single-minded in his desire to defeat the Scarabs. And I love that we get an explanation for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that he thinks that telling John his story is going to is going to earn his cooperation.
Yeah, because for Scorpius, isn't it obvious how terrible they are?
Yeah. And it doesn't occur to him that we also know how terrible the Sebastians are. The peacekeepers, well, not the Sebastians, but the peacekeepers are fascists. It's like, let me tell you about these fascists. Doesn't that make you want to side with the other fascists? John is like, no.
Yeah, like it's still bad guys versus bad guys. I'm not taking a side here.
Yeah. And and I love that he sticks to what the ancients told him.
Yeah.
If you're not smart enough to discover it, you're not smart enough to use it wisely. So, yeah, I
really
think
like that callback.
I think maybe Brain's clone John is smarter than actual John.
He had a little bit more of like a stilted affect, which I don't know if that was intentional. But regardless, like at first it seemed a little goofy, but then it felt And I feel like when you're copying people, right? Like just raw data, there has to be data decay somewhere. That wasn't like a story point or anything, but it's just an interesting thought. With Scorpius, what I really liked, and this is the first time that I've encountered Scorpius, like I was saying earlier, like I went to start to watch the whole series in life, but I intend to. But the thing that I really liked about Scorpius just in this episode, which I think is a testament to how it was written, is that you really get that, like you said, Sara, that really single-minded, um, just relentless pursuit. And I always think that that makes compelling villains. Magneto, not to switch franchises, but Magneto is not interesting because he's right sometimes. Magneto is interesting because his decision making is based on trauma and pragmatism, and those two things don't work well together. You have to pick one or the other. And I always find it fascinating because that's how people are generally. It feels like a human or Sebastian, it feels like like an actual character that can inhabit this place that's not I don't want to get too off the rails here, but there is a level of single-mindedness that's just cheesy. Like it has no nuance, like get me more pictures of Spider-Man. Like, so I really appreciated the way even this kind of episode, like displaying the trauma and stuff, it's kind of like, but they did it in a way that made it really interesting and nuanced. I think that a lot of opportunities that other writers may have would not have. They would have just been like, here you go, and just called it a day.
I definitely think that Magneto is an antecedent to, he's an ingredient in the development of Scorpius, along with, I think, Khan.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about cabin fever and annoying roommates? Which is
let's start with Moya. Let's start with Moya.
It is it's very relatable that Dargo's annoyance particularly.
He's like, what did Crichton say? Like, fine, let's just go around for a little bit longer and I'll authorize a shore leave. And he's just like, thank you.
Yeah.
Like, that's all I'm asking.
And I love that for Dargo, like the straw that's breaking his back is, John, you got to get these girls out of here.
You're upsetting the women.
Yeah.
You got to go. It's like vaguely like a little sexist almost, but like, it's more of like an altruistic, like, listen, they're kind of the linchpins of this whole thing. Like, we got to figure this out.
Yeah.
Well, it is these particular two girls who are constantly fighting with each other.
Yeah.
They're a little too alike. And the brat on brat, whatever.
Go on.
The tension between two brats is a lot. And
like two brats and two hardheads.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, that's just, talk about a recipe for disaster.
Which clearly they're having right now.
Right.
And they're kind of missing, Zahn was the mom friend. And in her absence, Erin can somewhat take that role.
Big sister.
Yeah. But now it's all falling on Dargo to be the responsible one.
Which he is terrible at.
I think he's doing better than, I think he's not terrible. He's learning.
Both are true. Sometimes I find when the Moya crew bickers or disagrees or has these kinds of debates, it's not all that grounded in past character decisions. It's much more in the moment or of the plot. This is not one of those episodes. So this episode was very reasonable, logical, developed from each one of them, including the way that both Pilot and Moya have these very strong instinctive drives when it comes to certain things, including apparently trust of an entire species. I found Linfer's character a little hard to pin down. Right up until the point where she blew herself up, I thought she was playing with him.
Mm.
And I guess maybe I'm strongly convinced that she wasn't, because like she couldn't have written anything down before she left. She couldn't have typed up a memo in Moya's computer before she left or something like that. She just had to be like, well, I guess I'm melting and my secrets die with me because, and then just flies off.
Oh, see, I read it kind of differently, actually.
Okay.
I can't speak to any like subtext that there is, because like I totally see that. But when she turned around, and like I'm terrible with names, but someone was like, "What's that?" And she's
Jewel.
like, "Jewel." She's like, the liquefaction process has begun, or something to that effect, and you can see it like kind of start a little bit. And up until that point, I was like, of your mind on that, because it was kind of like, will she, won't she? Is she here benevolently? This trade-off seems kind of harsh, because what are they going to do without Moya?
Yeah,
And
nothing.
like that's what felt like that's what anchored my whole thought process at that time, is like, so they make the trade, but now there's no Leviathan, so you know um but when the liquefaction process started, I kind of thought back on it in that, like, if I did something like not previously thought to be unbelievable, but something incredibly difficult to replicate, knowing that there was a sustainable risk using an experimental whatever at the time, I don't wonder if the initial offer for the trade was reactionary. It's kind of like when you, um, what's that thing that they call it, where somebody who like literally almost died, like people that get like totally creamed and run over by cars and they survive, and then they go through this period of like they're super happy and super, before the crash.
Like
I forget.
euphoric?
Yeah, I think it's called Survivor's Euphoria, or there's a
Mm-hmm.
different name for it, where somebody has a brush with death and they survive, and it's not that they feel invincible, they just had this overwhelming, joy that they didn't die, along with just your brain trying to process it. And so once she started the skin liquefaction, that's kind of how I read it, was like she did it, she's excited, she's going to make this trade, and then as it kind of went on, she got a little more somber and a little more somber until it happened. I think she knew it was going to happen, or knew that it was an acceptable risk. So at the time, she's like, wait a minute, like I came up with this technology and I thought it might work and it didn't, and I shouldn't inflict this on anybody else. Is like kind of how I read it, but I don't know.
I read her as kind of an Icarus. Like she was so sure that her tech fix was going to work. And so she was seemed very hubristic to me. And we did get the information from her that, like, if a worm, this is happening because these wormholes are unstable in the, I don't know, like neutrino reverse the polarity in the neutron flow kind of. You know what I mean? Like there's some side, so there's some techno babbly stuff that makes that if the worm, that means the wormhole is unstable and therefore goo. And I guess that the wormholes that we've seen before have all been stable. So I don't know what exactly is going on with that, but there we go. But she was so sure that she had solved the situation, and she she wasn't gonna take the ship and leave them high and dry. She was gonna give them the information to travel safely through wormholes so they could go home, and then she could keep the ship.
I missed that part.
Yeah. Because that was John was saying, well, with wormhole technology, you can go anywhere you want, even home.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like an opportunity to stop with this flying around aimlessly that they're doing, and take the off ramp. But then she's proven that no, actually, her fix is not a fix. And
We're still missing something. Still missing some secret ingredient.
Yeah. So, which is what Scorpius is working on.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I read her as like, this is hubris. This is the Icarus. I thought I'd cracked it. Oh crap! I have not cracked it.
Mm-hmm. It's worse than I imagined. Instead of a quick death, it's a slow death.
So I'm gonna take the fast way out and blow my ship up.
That's fair. I appreciate that.
So I don't know how much more information she could have left them if her thing didn't work.
I guess I don't know. I guess that makes sense. Like I like the Icarus. I like the Survivors Euphoria reading on top of it. I think that makes it more forgivable for me that she didn't take time to be like, well, let me tell you everything I know, or maybe you can finish what I started, or something like that. But instead, if she views it as like, no, nobody should ever have this knowledge or use this knowledge or something, then that makes more sense.
Yeah.
I missed that detail. Changes it a lot. I don't know how I missed it. We even did the synopsis. Like, I just didn't like connect it that way.
Well, I think like I've watched it a few times. And at first, I was also very confused by Lynn Firth's character because we don't get a lot other than we don't get any reason to know if Pilot and Moya are right to trust her implicitly. Because if she is this benevolent species, why is she working with Scorpius?
Right.
I see.
That is the question that we do not have an answer for. Like, if she is this being we are supposed to trust, why is she working with the enemy?
Yes.
And like, was this and if this was an enslaved thing, if this was forced work, as Stark was enslaved, we don't get any indication of that. And she was able to leave freely when she decided to take the test flight, unless they all thought she was going to turn to goo, and and are just like, how come we didn't get our Prowler back?
It's cost of doing business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're not too worried about, Scorpius isn't too worried about how many pilots turn to goo. So
he's not, and he's we'll get to Scorpius, but also all of the rest of the drama on Moya was very well grounded as well. I really liked and appreciated Dargo finally just dragging John.
Yes,
that was cool. Like, I don't have like the full context, but I was like,
when he was like, "This is the attitude that got Zahn killed." Like,
yeah, exactly. That exact moment,
I was clapping in my seat.
That was a low blow, but John deserves it.
Yeah, I mean, is it a low blow if it's true? Like, just it. Sometimes it takes our closest friends to tell us when we're farthest away from where we're supposed to be.
I think that's something that really like resonated with me in that moment too. Is I'm not going to get into like my own personal stuff, but it's always been making any big changes or anything like that. It's always been either that or somebody like, hey man, you're really screwing the pooch on this. Like, we need to just like reel it back. Let's work together and figure it out. That wasn't exactly this, but yeah, just that what you said is like, it takes like your closest friends sometimes to just say the thing that,
that you need to hear.
Maybe you didn't want to hear it.
No,
maybe you needed
to hear that.
Yeah.
But he has been giving him so much benefit of the doubt. And John has been like, this is 2 episodes, not in a row, but 2 episodes of the Moya storyline of everybody is annoyed with how much John is just like, no, I want to keep searching for wormholes. I want to keep searching for wormholes.
Mm-hmm.
and they're just kind of done with his shit. But they've been letting him have it to, even as much as Dargo is like, dude, girls are driving me nuts.
Yes.
Dude, we need shore leave. But the willing to unquestioningly surrender Moya to this person they don't know. Like, this is like, no, dude, this is too far.
I really like the way that they very casually, I don't want to say anthropomorphize, because like it is a being,
Mhm.
but the way that they handle that feels like really cool, because after we did the first episode that I was on, I went through like this big lore dump, because I was like, we talked about it, I think, on that episode or maybe after, but I was like, wait, they're like alive? And so I went through like this big like fandom Wikipedia thing about the Leviathans and how they're birthed and how they and I was like, and I really like the way that there's like a passive respect, that's given to these beings that I didn't really think about until this episode. I think that's cool. That's all.
Yeah, she is a being with her own will.
Yeah. We've also seen a few times up until this point where both Pilot and Moya's instincts often override their judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is, I think, also part of what was undergirding everybody going like, what the hell, man? Whenever John was like, yeah, maybe we should just do it. Pilot's for it. But if Pilot and Moya are not necessarily making informed choices or, I don't know, sane or rational choices, however you want to characterize it, then John supporting them for his own selfish ends absolutely also deserves the call out that he got.
Yeah, especially like Lynn for being a scientist attached to the Peacekeepers.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to Moya when she was under the supervision of scientists from the Peacekeepers?
Mm-hmm.
They impregnated her with a gunship. So like, and when we had the Moya's Gods episode, they entrusted Moya. Yeah, I know we hated that, but
yes, but that was exactly what I was thinking about, though. That was the episode I was thinking about. They did
entrust Moya to Zan.
Yeah.
Because they can't always make the best choices, and our pilot was, not mature enough to be joined with a Leviathan as expected. So like they are vulnerable, and we can't necessarily trust that they are making the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
They might have been, but
without even taking the opportunity or the time to pump Pilot for any supplementary information. Tell me more about Linford's people. How do you know so much about this? Like the most basic interview questions.
What are your intentions with our ship?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Where should we move to next? One of my favorite weird little guys is in this episode. We got a little more Strappa.
Yes, I see why you like him.
He's just a weird little guy. Yeah, I like that we get to spend a little time with the inhabitants of Scorpi's vessel. Like, we get more Braca.
Mm-hmm.
Scorpi's sub.
So we've got brats on one ship and subs on another ship, but we don't really seem to have very many responsible doms running around.
Well, the nurse is kind of a dominatrix, but more like assigned with aftercare.
Yeah.
I like Strappa. He was just kind of like just a little guy.
Yeah, he was
just doing his job,
doing his best.
Yeah, there's not a lot to talk about, but I just want to acknowledge my weird little guy.
He's a good little guy, Sara.
I love his like gesticulations when he's like like just obviously very frantically like recording or calculating or whatever he's doing is like, you're doing a good job, bud. I liked him a lot.
So let's talk about the Mind Palace and the exposition.
Uh-oh.
This is really is a trauma dump. Like, you talk about trauma dumping, like, I am going to bring you into my brain and make you watch my childhood trauma.
This is the equivalent of that one friend who invites you out for dinner and you haven't seen him in 6 months and they, have one drink and then just tell you all about all the horrible shit that's been happening after you say, so how you been? For 42 minutes. And the waiter can't even like come up and, not that I've had this experience or anything, can't even come up and take your order. And you finally get around to dessert when they remember that you exist and they're like, so how are you? And I'm like, well, I was great earlier.
And John didn't even ask, how are you?
No, he didn't. Like, John got abducted.
I want to get out of here. No, there's no way out of here.
Yeah. This version of John got forcibly photocopied.
This is like the reverse of the chair. The chair sucked all the memories out. Here he's like, I'm gonna make you. I'm gonna dump all my memories in you.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah,
I like how Scorpius was like, I suggest that you comply. You only make it worse, and you're like, oh no.
Like what? Yeah.
I'm gonna torture you with exposition.
I think it was also it was key to brain clone John's final refusal that this version of John was photocopied right after he killed Aaron under Scorpius's influence.
Yeah.
And like that, of course, there is no amount of crocodile tears that could possibly make this version of John side with Scorpius.
Yeah. They're yeah. Look at this race of Hitlers. Okay, but you are still fascists and you killed my girlfriend.
You're Hitlering just as bad.
You're doing the thing.
Yeah. No. And here is the mistake that Scorpius makes. Here's the mistake that so many people throughout the course of our own human Earth history have made. But I'm right. Which means that I can do those things and it's okay because I'm right. I can hurt people because I'm right.
Because I want revenge.
And it's utterly terrifying.
I don't want to keep going back to Magneto, but it was so much like.
Do you find like a pull or like you're drawn to the subject?
But no, it's just there's, I mean, like Sara said when I brought it up the first time, it seems like there's a lot of parallels, and it's not even just hatred so much of most of the time can be like a motivator, but it's like that conclusion, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I'm on this quest for X reason. I'm not thinking about how I get there. I'm just looking for the end, whether that be some horrible tragedy, not to downplay anything, but like, sure. Especially in fiction, like all the steps along the way never seem to matter until they get there or they're stopped. It's like that just monastic drive to see it through is so intoxicating. It must be,
Yeah.
Well, there's nothing quite like feeling that you're right.
Yeah. I started working around that. I was well, I won't say their name. But I was talking to a friend and they were like, you're you don't really seem to have a lot of opinions these days. And I was like, oh no, I have lots of opinions. And they're like, well, you used to be very loud about them. And I was like, yeah, and I was wrong sometimes. So I've taken to just listening. That's my era right now. I feel like so many of these villains is like, and I know why they don't, but it's just like, just take a seat. Let's just hash it out real quick. But
do you want to put holes in the universe to get your revenge? How much pilot goo are you willing to make?
I mean, so there's a notion that I've seen out there online, kind of replicated in like social media meme spheres about heroes and villains and the differences between them. And there's the tragic romantic die for our ship notion of like a hero will sacrifice the girl to save the world, a villain will destroy the world to save the girl, that kind of thing. But one of the best characterizations that I have found, and something that resonates with me and that I had, I guess, pre-baked thoughts on even before I found this notion online, is one of the things that is a difference between a hero and a villain is when something bad happens to them, a hero says, I'm going to make sure this never happens to anybody else. And a villain says, I'm going to make sure this never happens to me again. And so that's what we have with Scorpi here. And that's what John is teetering, real John, not clone John. That's what real John is teetering on the edge of over in Oya.
I love Scorpi, but there are some there are some tropes that this is playing in, because it is doing the tragic mulatto. And I wouldn't use that word in any other situation, except that is what the trope is called. Which is, there's a long-standing trope of presenting characters of mixed race as tragic, doomed, miserable, because they don't have, they're perceived as not having an identity, and in the world that wanted people to fit into one place or another. In conservative sort of storytelling. So there was developed this repeated story would present characters who were from a mixed background as tragic, as broken. The other thing he traffics in is he's a disabled villain. So yeah. And a survivor of child abuse to being evil is another trope. And as much as I think that Scorpius, they aren't just doing the trope, they are doing something interesting with it. But we also have to acknowledge that they are also doing the trope, and with less perhaps discussion of the tropes when this was made. But since we're watching it now, I think it bears pointing out. At least, however, the thing about this story is we have other stories of mixed hybrid characters who are, well, I mean, Jothy's situation was also tragic, but it wasn't. It was because, I think in that case we got definitely that's because of the culture being, because of the racism in the culture, not because, like with Dargo and his wife, it is the culture that's the problem, not them. I think that it's, in this story, it's not really, I don't think we're telling a disabled people evil story, because there are other characters who also can be read as disabled. And I don't think we're actually saying that mixed characters are evil, but we do have a villain that is disabled and mixed race.
Those are the ingredients that were used to create this villain.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, I think those are very fair and relevant observations for sure.
Not that I would change anything about Scorpius, but we still have to acknowledge where the ingredients come from.
You're right that they are also doing interesting things with those tropes that they have assigned to him. And so far what he's done is he's chosen to embrace half of his heritage to a fanatical degree, to an unhealthy degree for sure. And they've definitely made his interactions with all of the rest of the Sebaceans around him, and with the crew of Moya and with Jothi and everything like that. Nobody else is commenting on his mixed heritage but him.
Mm-hmm.
At least in the present.
Yeah, the Sebaceans have in the past, but we know that the Peacekeepers, but we know the Peacekeepers are racists.
Oh yeah, for sure. So they're doing interesting things with it, but it's interesting when you kind of put it all together like that. The raw ingredients definitely feel like a pretty standard grab bag for how to make a villain.
So I suppose we've kind of danced around it. We should probably talk about the dark stuff.
We should probably talk about the dark stuff.
I will say, for myself, one criticism I have of this episode is they did not need to show us the rape scene.
Yeah.
That seems to be a running theme.
Yeah.
Or at least from the two that I've seen.
They cut around it a bit, but yeah, we did not need to see this. We already knew what had happened to her. And knowing that Scorpius was forced to watch it is information that is disturbing, but they can give that information to us without us having to see.
Yeah. I think I don't know. There's like a desensitization process with media where I recognize it, I see it. I was not apathetic to it because I was like, oh, basically the same thought, why did we really need to see this?
Mm-hmm.
But it was it even just kind of upset the pacing of what was happening, because it became, and I'm not going to describe it or anything, but it just became this whole aside where why did we need 2 minutes of film when you said what happened? You know what I mean? Or even just to have it open and then that's it. Make it a flash or something if you really wanted to do that. But I don't think having the larger context of it really enhanced anything. In fact, I think it kind of took it away.
She said she was going to show him.
Exactly.
She said she was going to show it to him. You already told us you don't also need to show us. But again, this was, years ago, and I didn't necessarily understand quite. But there are some more sensitive ways to do this.
I think at least part of it also, and this is not me saying, this is not me disagreeing with you, Sara. I agree with you that the creative writing choice to show it was a poor one. But it also was Scorpius showing it to John. So we weren't the only ones seeing it. Clone John was also seeing it. And Scorpius's explicit goal was to persuade John and manipulate him really with crocodile tears about woe is my tragic life and backstory and everything like that. So while the creative writing decision was poor, the in-universe character decision was perfectly reasonable, as Scorpius was also torturing John, basically.
Yeah, and I don't actually think it was crocodile tears. I think he was using his own real tears. He was I think he committed to the bit.
Well, I think that is crocodile tears, though. If someone is genuinely using their own tragic backstory in an effort to manipulate somebody, that's to me, that falls under the umbrella of crocodile tears, because it's insincere in its weaponization of sincerity.
Yeah, it's white woman tears.
Yeah, there you go.
There's this thing that I found out recently I don't have any issue saying it. I'm in therapy. I've been in therapy for a while. And to anybody that's watching that isn't or hesitates but wants to, we get other parts of our body checked out. I don't think there's anything wrong with like rummaging around up here a little bit. It's an organ like
Absolutely.
anything else. It just happens to house our existential cognition. But I found a lot of benefit to it. But do you? Like nobody should shame you. But there's this thing that I found out that I learned about, and it's basically sharing trauma as manipulation, and it's typically done by cis hetero men to manipulate, in theory, cis hetero women. Not always for intercourse, or it can be financial, it can be emotional, it can be for security, any number of things. I don't want to like traumatize everybody, but I found out about this and I was thinking about that whole time, even though like the subjects were not the same as described. It really, I've been in situations where it's really hard to suss out, and I don't want to pathologize anybody, but there was somebody that I was, helping out a lot. We were quite close friends, I thought, and we probably actually were, but everything was just trauma, 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 trauma. And I sort of viewed it as like, this person trusts me. They're, they need somebody to listen because nobody is. And then it took me a while to catch on that, after every time, a couple times we hung out, it was, hey man, can I have some money for smokes? Hey man, I need some gas to get back home. Hey man, and just this on and on and on thing. And once it became a pattern, I was like, oh, so I was talking about that the other day. And that's when, my therapist kind of alerted me to this idea. And so I could not stop thinking about that while we were watching that. Because it's like
weaponizing trauma.
The thing that really struck me about it, because you both were talking about like the crocodile tears and stuff, is my therapist had mentioned that, they are also reliving that trauma. But whether the tears are real or not is like mostly irrelevant. Whether it's for the manipulation or whether it's for the trauma or a combination of both, the coping of it. And I'm not a therapist, so I want to make that clear. So I'm probably messing this up. But basically, the idea is that this is the way that they've learned to socialize. I don't like that term, but that's the way that you learn to function with people, right, wrong, or indifferent. And then watching that scene, and specifically with the scene that they didn't need to show, really made me think about that. I don't have a wider conclusion than that, but I just found that really fascinating, and especially that I had therapy at some point this week, and then now we're like, you buy a car and then you start seeing that car everywhere. It was like that kind of thing.
Yeah, because it's a form of emotional abuse, but it's also self-emotional abuse to be like, I'm gonna stay in this trauma and not move forward. I'm just gonna keep re-traumatizing myself.
Absolutely.
Which Scorpius is doing to fuel his revenge, because revenge is the only way he seems to be able to think he can get out of this. You function, yeah. It is his whole existence. Yeah, is pain. Like he is constantly in pain because of the heat, because of his Scaran, because of the Scaran aspects of his body. He is constantly being tortured by his own body, by his own existence. And his only way to deal with that is to focus on revenge and hatred. And he is in that, and in that he is not giving himself a way forward. And he is just hurting people around him. Which is why he's a villain.
That's the tricky part about is in the real world or in real life or whatever. It's the tricky part about, there's the saying hurt people, which is sort of a trite distillation of that phenomenon that you're describing, Oddnon, that I've also encountered for sure. And it's been my observation that a lot of times the people who do that kind of trauma dumping or that kind of emotional manipulation are the same people who at some point in their life were convinced that their needs were not worth being met. And so the only way they know how to get their needs met is through manipulation, through creating these kind of emotional sinkholes, where you do say, hey, how's it going? And then you get, 30 minutes of somebody's terrible, tragic week, unprompted otherwise. And it's difficult as somebody, I'll say this, it was difficult for me in several of those situations that I've encountered to have those necessary personal boundaries for myself to say, like, this doesn't sound like the conversation that we should be having, or this sounds like a conversation that you should have with somebody else. Have you ever talked to anybody about this? Have you ever worked through all this? Because they'll also try to couch it in a joke. They'll be like, well, as they're describing it or talking about it. And so watching John at the end, and I realized there's a lot more going on sci-fi wise, but watching John at the end have that boundary and be like, yeah, you know what? No. Like, that does sound horrible, but no. Like, that was also really reaffirming in this episode.
It occurs to me that John, like the John with a body, Moy John is kind of doing
one of the bodies.
One of the bodies.
One of the bodies. The one we deal with in this case. The other one's kind of busy with Aaron. But that Moya John is doing the same thing as Scorpius. He is sitting in his obsession with wormholes, the same way that Scorpius is sitting in his obsession and in his trauma, and he's harming people around him.
Mm-hmm.
It's a weaker form of it. Like it's his obsession, and it's not. Nobody is actually harmed in this episode, in their side of the episode, apart from Linfer.
Yeah.
Whose harm is self-inflicted. Essentially got three people inflicting harm on themselves with their own behavior, either doing an Icarus or sitting in his obsession, even when everybody else is pointing out that this is causing problems and that this has caused a death. Mm-hmm. And then sitting in his revenge. We have that is the unifying thing of our three stories.
And a person's unwillingness to work on themselves definitely does not entitle them to bleed on other people.
No.
Scorpius could do with some therapy, is really what I'm saying.
Yeah, and he's not just bleeding on other people; he's building wormhole weapons.
Wormhole weapons.
I'll see the big board. Love that movie.
There's this. I don't know if either of you are familiar with, like, I'm sure both of you are familiar with the Eldritch Madness trope.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, with like the ant, and an ant could be wandering around a computer board, and it's perfectly happy and fine to do so. But then if you anthropomorphize the ant and you explain to it what a computer chip is and what it does and how it functions, and then you take it away, they're gonna seem just like, played with madness, trying to explain to other ants what a computer chip that they've all been walking around on is. And like the wormhole thing, especially with John, that was like the first thing that it reminded me of, is like getting that sort of, single-mindedness. But more so than that, it's almost more torturous in a way, and that other people recognize that it's real.
Mm-hmm.
But they're just all. So John is like, well, it's here, it can happen. why aren't you working with me on this?
Yeah.
Like, we have to figure this out. But to everybody else, they're like, yeah, we know. Like, let's pass. Let's go home. You know, not quite a 1-to-1 to be fair, but
But no, very, yeah. Analogous.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we haven't talked about Tauza.
Oh, jeez.
Is that a nanny? She's like the anti-Mary Poppins.
To put it lightly.
Yeah.
The nurse Ratched of Mary Poppins.
She, that whole thing affected me kind of deeply. I'm not going to go into all of it, but or any of it really. But having experienced that kind of treatment is I really felt for Scorpio in a way, and kind of saw the the intention and why it is the way that it is. But the difference is how you direct it and how you handle it. Taos is one of those people, or one of those characters, that if they were your family member and somebody said, "Oh, did you hear Tauza died?" and you say, "Oh, good." And that's like the extent of and I had that experience. That family member passed away, and my one of my other family members called me and said, "Oh, hey, did you hear?" Yeah, and but it was phrased a little differently. They were like, "Oh, did you hear? So and so dropped dead." And I was like, "Oh, good." And then we both laughed, and then that was it. And it wasn't like, "Oh, it's funny." It's just like, I learned to deal with it, and I've since moved on a long time ago, but I wrote that person off. I haven't talked to them really at that point for like 5 or 6 years. So it's like that same like kind of trauma is where you just like, except I just like accepted it. And I was like, all right, well, I'm not laughing because it happened, but I'm laughing because this is still just deeply uncomfortable. you know?
Yeah.
It's a very human reaction.
Yeah, it's a weird it's a weird thing. But to relate it back to the Farscape thing, is like, there is that, I don't know if you want to call it training. I don't know if you call it like grooming, I guess would be a term for it. Watching Tauza was very upsetting.
Yeah.
Not because of like my own stuff, but just in general, is like this idea that another living being is just like your template, not by any will of their own, just is reduced down to this template for you to, lather this torture upon to get the achieved results. It's really like quite a disturbing thing. And then to also take all of that stuff, relive it, put it on John as a means to an end, I think just goes to show like the level of, there's no excusing it, but goes to show like the level of not only trauma, but like the sadism, involved in that. And I thought that it was really compelling. The scene at the end, uh, with the tubes in the eyes and all that. At first I was like, "Oh, this is really corny." But then I kind of rewound it and watched like 20 minutes before that to kind of lead up. And I was like, yeah, this actually kind of makes a lot of sense. Like, you finally have the ability to fight back, and you just do, because that there's no end. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, overall, this is a really good episode.
Yeah, it's just the fact that Scorpius is a disabled character, and what we are seeing is a disabled child being tortured by their caregiver. And that is something that happens in the real world.
Yeah.
You know, people who think that they are teaching kids to toughen up or forcing them to try and be fit as much as possible into an able world, who will do horrible things. You know, there are treatments for autistic kids that are just
torturous.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think really begins to describe it, but yeah.
Yeah, and like, and like Tauza, they would say that they're doing it for the kid's good.
Yeah.
At least she makes no pretense about loving the child. Because that's an extra. Just one people who would say that while doing it, it's like just an extra level of fucked up.
Yeah.
But there's so much history of disabled children being institutionalized and mistreated in institutions, and it's just horrific. And Towser really earns getting her eyes stabbed with cooling rods.
Yeah. That was quite the.
It's a very Farscape end. They always do something with eyes.
The whole damn thing, man. That room, Baby Scorpi's makeup, Tauza's glow stick eyeball stabs, like that was all just like gruesome as hell, and really well done. And there's even a long history of differently abled folks getting corrected. I think left-handed children being basically tortured into right-handedness.
When I was a kid, I was left-handed, actually. I'm right-handed now. Take a guess why. It's definitely, it's just funny that you brought that up. But no, little known fact, because I don't talk about it because it sucked, is I was going into originally what they probably still call it this, but special education. I don't know if there's a better term for it anymore, but I was going because I really believed in it. I took a bunch of classes. We had a program in high school where you were directed by a what they would call, special needs teacher, and you would go and volunteer in the classrooms, and it was amazing. I got to meet all these kids, and I thought it was awesome. And I started to go to college, and you have to do, so many hours if you go specifically into the disability category of teaching. At least the program that I was going through at the college that I was at, you had to do like constant in classroom stuff, even like for my first year, which is quite odd. So I got placed, and just some of the stuff that I saw was I got out immediately. I went for a reason because I thought I was helping people. And then when I started to be able to like sit down and talk to the teachers, it just became very apparent that, and I'm not saying all of them, I'm sure that there are great teachers out there for that. But just some of the stuff that I saw and heard, I was like, there's no way. Because if I got into school with this and I had to confront this, like I'm going to jail. Because I cannot, you know, I grew up in school. I apologize for it's not that bad, I don't think, but I apologize for the term. But even through high school, all I was bad at math. And they would send me to what they deemed, the teachers, the adults called it this, the slowpoke room, where other kids that needed help with their classwork. I didn't think about it at the time, and I got a lot of math done. So, win-win. But it's just little things like that that really like kind of key you into exactly how like disabled children, especially, not even to mention adults, are treated not only in like active ways with like active abuse, but in passive ways of like both not being thought of in design choices. I'm disabled, and there are places that I just can't go because it's just not made for me. The number of trips or things that I've had to not be a part of simply because there just wasn't a place for me. But also just the way that disabled folks are thought of. And that, I think, really They could have done a little better, but I think for the time that it was made, it really touched on like a lot of that.
Mhm.
I feel like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a catharsis in seeing Tauza as a representative of all of the people all of the shitty people who did
Yeah.
things to try and make you normal. There's a catharsis in seeing her, in seeing the evilness of that represented, and then the evilness of that getting their eyes stabbed.
Yeah, there really was. Like I said, I had to rewatch it once to like really absorb it. But by the end of it, I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a few people I would metaphorically put in towns. Yeah, I think any of us who are differently bodied, and who have disabilities with like neurospiciness or such things have had to deal with the Tauzas in our world. Even if it's just people who are with a little Tauza in the mix. And yeah, the important thing is that we are not like Scorpius. We do not live our lives wanting revenge against those people.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely. That's definitely true.
Because it is not really a healing place. We do not tear holes in the galaxy and make Zivarmhal weapons.
I need to make some calls later.
But that's what fiction is for, so we can kind of see, we can kind of play trauma out on the screen and get it kind of out of our heads.
Catharsis.
Yes. A bit of a cathartic.
There's something to be said for like being able to watch it fictionally. And while that may be triggering to some, and I think that should be absolutely respected and regarded, I personally have found a use in some situations. There is trauma that I have that I'm like, nope, I'm not fictional or otherwise, I'm not doing it. But in some of these cases, I think it can be useful to be able to have like the disconnect to not only, like you said, Sarah, like get it out of your head, but like see it being worked on or worked out in some way that doesn't involve you, you know, like the impersonal aspect of it can, I would imagine, can be helpful. It's been helpful to me. I don't want to speak for anybody but myself.
Yeah.
And as much as John is forced to endure this trauma dump, he actually does acknowledge the horror of it. He does, he does give Scorpi the acknowledgement that should be helping lead him towards something healthy, but except that he doesn't want to. But, of having someone else see this and be like, that's fucked up. That is definitely fucked up that she did that. That is definitely like the fact that she set a trap for him in the place his mother was kidnapped so that she could traumatize him just a little bit. Like, that is fucked up. It's having someone acknowledge that this kind of behavior is fucked up is good, even though he's not going to co-sign Scorpi's revenge bullshit. He will at least say, acknowledge the fucked upness.
Yeah. That sounds like a rough time that you had, and this isn't a conversation you and I should be having. Yeah. It is possible to have empathy and boundaries.
Yeah.
I do this thing with my partner. I've talked about it on stream before, but we got it from this video of Freddie Prinze Jr. Dunking on Star Wars fans that they were mad that Han Solo gave the Millennium Falcon to a girl, I think was the end of the rant. But as
Can't roll
he's
my
like,
eyes hard enough.
yeah, so Freddie Prinze Jr. Just has like this brilliant rant, but everybody starts laughing and he goes, "No, this is information, not affirmation." And I have taken that, and me and my partner practice that. Is where like if one of us is upset or somebody's having a hard time, and it's like it seems particularly sensitive, hey, information or affirmation? Do you want me to help you or do you want me to just listen? And then we just kind of run with it. And I gotta say, it works pretty well. Like just asking somebody rather than like, what do you need? Which can be perfectly valid. Like sometimes you just need, do you want me to help or do you want me to hear? Mm-hmm. And then we can work off that.
And likewise, I mean, I think I know when Josh was talking about friends who just dump on you, I'm like, oh God, do I do that? is he talking about me? Which I think, I mean, how many of you out there are doing the same? You're doing like, oh God, I talk about my shit. Am I doing that? We're like, it's not a binary never talk about your trauma or just dump. It's like because I've heard people, there's some hot takes going around being like, you should never dump on your friends. Like, no, you don't dump on your friends, but you can vent to your friends.
Yeah.
It's just like there are there are systems for venting, and like when it's okay, and if it's if you check in that they're in the place for it, or you set up a space for venting, and then everybody respects that is the space for venting.
You seek consent.
Exactly.
Because we are not Scorpius.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the most important lesson here today, kids, is we are not Scorpius.
Yeah. Yes, obviously. But the baseline is do not trap people's consciousness inside your own brain and force them to be your counselor.
I feel like that should be pretty easy to do. Like very specifically, that should be fairly easy, but
don't hunt someone down across the galaxy or stick chips in their heads.
Yeah.
So, anybody got anything else?
I will say that it has re-enthused me to start the show again. Mm-hmm. I was never not enthusiastic, but sitting down and watching it, because what was that first one? Eat Me, I believe it was called.
That we had done before.
Yep, I really loved that, and I like evangelized to all of my sci-fi friends because I found that the overwhelming of like, I don't like to section off groups of fans, but like the overwhelming amount of sci-fi fans, even if they've watched Farscape, they're like, yeah, it's really goofy, but it was kind of fun. And I'm like, no, you need to like watch it again. And I had only saw that one. And I was like telling people like, okay, you just tried to watch it. Watch this one episode that I watched and then start to watch it again. Because that's how it happened the first time. And not that I was not ever going to do it, but there's just really there's a quality to the show that really draws me in, and I think I need to just let it.
Yeah, it does take most of the first season for them to develop the quality, and so some people do see the first season and are like, yeah, it's goofy. Say it's goofy, but it is also.
the first season had some legs, man.
Yeah, because
some chops.
Once you really get into it, it's like, how is this weird, goofy Muppet show like doing this to my heart?
Why is a tiny frog Muppet making me cry? Again.
I just the Leviathans, just as a concept, are just so fascinating. So I need to, yeah.
Yeah, it's very cool. So, are you ready to hear the title of the next episode?
Am I? Am I ever?
Well, you have to, I'm waiting for your consent on that one.
Sara, I would love to hear the title of the next episode. See, that was an enthusiastic yes, kids.
Good. It's called Meltdown.
Cool. I look forward to having one.
I don't know who will be joining us for that one. Editing Sara here, and I do know the guest for the next episode. We will be joined by Vera Wild from Council of Geeks.
Sounds good. Meltdown. Meltdown.
So that should be in 2 weeks for the folks at home. So what's your favorite part? Oddnon, as a guest, would you like to go first?
Of the show? Of the episode?
This episode.
Yeah. Really the whole, I guess it could be classified as a part, but just the whole mind meld, like neuro clone thing, all of that was like so deeply interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it really kept me like anchored in the episode. Not that I was going to be taken out, but the manipulation, the motivation, just the concept of it was probably my favorite part.
For me, and I've alluded to this particular moment a couple of times, but for me, it was Clone John's final defiance of Scorpius. As they're facing the swirling equations together, and Clone John finally being like, "No," like that moment really stuck with me.
A good moment. I can't quite decide if my favorite part is Dargo sort of stepping into kind of a responsibility kind of role, what he's working on, or no, I think it's Strappa. He's just a weird little guy.
He's just your weird little guy.
I just love the design and the performance. It's just very Farscapey, and it's a bit of lightness in this very dark episode. So, Oddnon, would you like to tell folks where they can find you?
Yeah, really. I have my link tree on twitch.tv/ODDNON. That's Oddnon. And in the little bio section there's everything from sending me a tip. My stream is on that page. Horser, my horror comedy comic, that's coming to a close soon. Everything you need is there. And I also just got picked up to write for Hard Drive.
Yes, congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much. I couldn't believe that got through. But they're treating me really well. They have editors that really help me out. So that's really what I do. Just www.twitch.tv/ODDNON. Everything's there. Thank you.
You can find me over on Instagram at Josh Gosdin. I don't do a whole lot over there other than talk about food and self-care, but it's my thing. Sara, what about you?
Food and self-care is important. That is enough.
Yeah.
I'm Sara. I have the Fat Culture Critic on YouTube. I'm doing stuff there. You can find me on the Twitter. For some reason, I'm still there. At Bluestock and Sara, and the various other places. And you can support the channel at support the podcast on Patreon. On Patreon/Muppet Sex and Drama, or me I'm at the Fat Culture Critic at Patreon, and you can do all the things in the doobly-doo. All the links will be there. So yeah, and next episode does not have anything that requires a content warning.
All right, look at us. First time in a while.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, no, I think it's all manageable to most people.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. We will talk to you again in 2 weeks.
Bye, y'all.
See ya.
And he's not just bleeding on other people, he's building wormhole weapons.
Wormhole weapons.
I'll see the big board. Love that movie.